Good morning and welcome back to another edition of the NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017. This is the DFS edition of the Daily Fantasy or the Fantasy Baller because I've ideally wanted to do a podcast surrounding it, fantasy basketball, but I just didn't really want to start it in the middle of the season. I did one episode and it felt forced, so I decided I'll wait till the off season. That's really neither here nor there. We're here to talk what's the remainder of the NBA DFS season, which is not going to be too much longer. 2.5 weeks, probably a best case scenario there. Yeah, so it's coming down, screeching to a halt. If you read the picks yesterday, probably would have did really well. Basically, I don't know how much I conveyed it in the podcast, but if you read the article, I definitely saw the idea to lean heavily on the Washington-Boston game and grab a little exposure if you had to the Jazz-Warriors game, and that worked out pretty nicely. I think, all things considered, just looking through the box score of the Utah Jazz Golden State game, I mean, it just seemed more or less like a pretty even keel game all around by just about everybody, so nobody really stood out, had a monster game, etc., etc. Tonight, we're going to go back to a couple of blowout series thus far. Toronto actually didn't get blown out too bad by Cleveland, but San Antonio absolutely did by Houston. So, LeBron James, well, let's start with the Toronto side of things. Ultimately, I still believe the way to get to the Cavs is by going through the guard position, so I'm automatically going to kind of push up Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, and at this point in the year, you probably don't need told to play those guys, but in tournaments, those would be the guys I would weight heavier on this Raptors team. Next up would be Serge Ibaka. His price hasn't gotten like way out of control. It's 6,200. You know, he's floating around that point, and he does have, I think, some mid-30s upside, so I don't mind floating him around there. PJ Tucker finally had a basketball game. I'm not buying in on it. If he has another good one this time, maybe I'll buy in, but I'm not gonna. That's the way these things go with guys like Tucker and Carroll. Like, they'll have one good game every 10 games, but is that really enough to warrant putting them in your lineups? I really just don't think so. I mean, yeah, he showed us that the potential's there, but he also showed us like the 6 times before this that the potential was not there. So I'm not going to be too heavy on him. Norman Powell moving to the bench loses a lot of his luster. Still had a good game, though, in 21 minutes, 17.4 fantasy points on FanDuel. Not the worst you're going to find. Would love to say let's play some Jonas Valanciunas, but they're not dedicated to giving him any kind of serious minutes. So basically, for me, it's going to be the big three of Toronto, and I'll be moving on. On the Cleveland side of the ball, LeBron James, man, I mean, he's just priced so high. When you look at his price versus his output, like, it's pretty absurd. He needs to put up, you know, close to 65 fantasy points, I believe, and he definitely can, but when you're looking at him at that price and realizing that he only did that one time thus far in the playoffs, doesn't paint the best picture, because you can't have LeBron not having big games. Fortunately, though, you know, it's a play where there's such few games on the slate that you're just looking for the high point amount. Like, okay, he didn't hit 65, he didn't hit 5x value. Does that mean LeBron was a bad play? Probably not, because how many other guys in this situation are going to be hitting 54 to 60 fantasy points? Not too many. There's not too many guys left in the playoffs I mean, on this slate, you're basically looking at Kawhi Leonard, and that's just about it that's going to be able to give you that potential kind of upside. So I look at LeBron James as kind of a necessary evil. Moving on from there, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love. I don't think Kyrie Irving has hit 5x that value one time, but again, if at that price you could get early 40 fantasy points out of him, he's worth it. Kevin Love, ditto. He's not hitting that 40-point mark. He did it one time in the Indiana series. 35.3, not killer, all things considered that you only have 2 games to pick from, and one of them features a team that didn't look great last time. Tristan Thompson came around. At his price, he's worth his price increased a little bit. I think he's still worth a look in tournaments. I just probably wouldn't be too heavy on him. And I still wouldn't rule out guys like Deron Williams and Channing Frye. No, they didn't pan out last time, but there's still plenty of time left in the series, and I think they're good basketball players that will have to contribute on this team. Moving on, you got to figure that Greg Popovich has retooled what the approach of the Spurs is going to be for Game 2. That puts a guy like James Harden squarely on my radar. Again, like, he's never been off my radar. I hate saying things like that. Like, saying Danny Green is on my radar is a statement that you need to make, because how often is Danny Green on your radar? But James Harden should always be on your radar. I guess I'm just saying, like, I'm not going to shy off of him because he didn't have a great game, whatever. He played well against his team. His team played well enough against his team that it shut it down totally and completely. So, I mean, there's that. Harden, one of the few high upside guys left if the Spurs bring it, which I think they really will. I do think you'll see a big number next to Harden's name. And, he's a guy that you definitely need to have some exposure to. Clint Capella has upside. Price is up there. Does make me a little bit nervous to want to consider playing him at that price. But, again, could be a necessary evil with that position looking pretty bleak. Trevor Ariza finally decided to have, like, some kind of an offensive game. His price dropped from the beginning of this series, so he's a reasonable value at this point, to be honest with you. And then I would look at the trio of Patrick Beverley, Eric Gordon, Lou Williams, all guys at their prices that could end up being pretty strong tournament plays. I really don't have one that I like more than the others, to be honest with you. It will just be a matter of me for whose salary fits where, and they'll kind of be the last players I put in at each position. Last up, we have the Spurs. I am expecting Kawhi Leonard to come out swinging in this one. I can't imagine he's happy that his team lost that bad. He's looked great through this series, so no hesitation on my end to keep him out of my lineups. And, he's a guy that we'll have pretty big exposure to tonight. LaMarcus Aldridge, I'm convinced he's going to decide this series. If he can't get his stuff together, there's no way that the Spurs will make it. And he hasn't been playing bad necessarily, but I just don't, if you feel like you want more out of him as your second option, he just hasn't been consistently there to help Kawhi. When you're looking at Tony Parker, who feels like he's doing more on the court, I think we have a problem. But we know Houston has problems with big men. Aldridge still a high-quality basketball player. I don't think you can go into a void mode just because he hasn't looked good yet. I mean, the talent's there, the opportunity is there. There's only been one game in this series, and I think that ultimately each series plays out at least a little bit differently. So I would be in on him, especially if you think you're going to see a depressed ownership point on him. Tony Parker, still in play for me. That's a nice price for someone. Ooh, man, I got to get to sleep earlier at night. It's a nice price point for someone who can be playing mid-30s minutes if this game stays close. I know he gets Patrick Beverley defense, but this is the playoffs. We're not like isolating matchups like that and trying to make plays based off of Patrick Beverley's a good defender, because you would never play anyone against him. And I assure you, throughout the year, people have had pretty good fantasy performances against Patrick Beverley. Outside of that, at his price, the minutes, David Lee isn't a horrible option, but he's going to have to do a lot more than take 2 shots to, get things done. But he's still on my radar. I just can't really, I want to love Pau Gasol. He's got a depressed price, but he's not seeing any kind of minutes whatsoever. His minutes seem to have diminished from the start of the Memphis series. Again, with Houston having problem with bigs, it's curious why Popovich didn't give him that much time. I get the game was out of hand. We could see a completely different strategy for game 2, so that's part of the reason why I'm keeping him on my radar. All right, that wraps it up for today. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Sign up for our NBA mailing list. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Research and Win. And join us again tomorrow.